Delighted that you're here, and I hope you've got your Bible with you and eager to study with us as we talk about some things very fundamental and first principle in their nature. Those who are members of the Church of Christ often face this statement from some friend or family member that those in the Church of Christ think they're the only ones going to heaven. Sometimes that comes in the form of a question. You may have had someone ask you that question. Is it true that those of you in the Church of Christ think you're the only ones going to heaven? Sometimes it comes in the form of a statement, as maybe even a charge. Here's what the problem I have with the Church of Christ is y'all are the ones that think you're the only ones going to heaven. Sometimes it comes in the form of a joke. Perhaps you've been treated to the joke, or been told the joke about someone dies and they go to heaven, and as he's being shown around the rooms and confines of heaven, they go by a certain room and tell them to be quiet because those in that room are from the Church of Christ, and they think they're the only ones here, and everybody laughs. It's supposed to be funny. Whether that comes in the form of a statement or a form of a question or the form of a joke, that deserves an answer, and that deserves a biblical answer. Perhaps you've been asked that question and you wonder, how is the best way to approach that question? How should I respond to that question? Should I respond to that joke, or should I respond to that statement or that charge that is made? And how should I respond to that? Or maybe there's someone present who's got that same question themselves. They're wondering, is it true that those in the Church of Christ think they're the only ones that are going to heaven? So for our study this morning, this question, will only those in the Church of Christ be saved? How would you answer that question? What would you say in answer to that question? Why do we need to revisit that question when most of those present are members of the church and have been members of the church for many years? Well, we need to answer that question because, number one, we're asked that question frequently. We're charged with that statement frequently. And sometimes those who are members of the Church of Christ are not clear on answering that question. Here's some phraseology that you'll hear from some members of the church sometimes. They'll talk about people in other denominations. That implies the Church of Christ is just one of many different denominations. Sometimes you'll hear members of the Church of Christ talk about good Christian people that are their neighbors. Oh, he's a good Christian man. That's a good Christian family. Well, where do they go to the church? Well, they go to church at some denomination somewhere. And so that says that we think, or some people think, that they're good Christians in all of these denominational churches. So we need to revisit this question. Will only those in the Church of Christ be saved? Three things we want to consider. We need to come to an understanding of what the question is all about. Secondly, we need to come to an understanding of the answer to that question. And then thirdly, we need to understand what that answer demands. So let's focus on the question first of all. Let's come to an understanding of the question. And so we're going to go slow and methodical, and perhaps you'll learn something here, even though you know the answer of how you would approach someone in answering that question. So let's start first of all with why that question would even be asked, first of all. You may have someone that's asked you that question and that you have talked to and invited them to church, and they've asked you this question, and why do they ask that question? Well, first of all, that's asked because of a denominational view they have of all churches. They view God's people as being divided into various denominations. They view the Church of Christ as just one of many different denominations, all of which are acceptable unto God. So that being the case, if you answer that question in the affirmative and you say, yes, I think only those in the Church of Christ will be saved, that's unacceptable in their sight. That's like saying you have to buy a particular brand food, Kroger brand food, in order to be healthy. See, that's absurd. Who would think that you could only buy Kroger brand food to be healthy? There are other brands that are just as good, and you could be just as healthy buying other brand foods. You see, that's absurd to them. How could you think that? They have a denominational view of the church. So let's talk about this denominational view. Here's how that works. What I'm about to show you is not the biblical picture, it is the denominational view of the church. Here's how that works. There are people who think that this larger shaded area represents God's people, in other words, those who are saved, those who have come into a saved relationship with God. The denominational concept is that God's people are divided into various segments or flavors, if you will. So some of God's people decide they want to be Seventh-day Adventists, and they believe that doctrine, and they practice that, and they rally around that concept, and so that's some of God's people. Some of God's people may identify as Nazarenes, and some of God's people may identify as Catholics. Some are Presbyterians. They all believe and practice different things. Some in the Church of God, and some in the Church of Christ. Some in the Baptist, and some in the Methodist. And on we could go with thousands of denominations. Literally thousands of denominations. So the concept is all of these are God's people, but some of God's people are here, and some are over here. And in their mind, the Church of Christ is just one of many different acceptable groups. God's people are divided into various segments. And so just as you think you could go to Kroger and buy good food, or you might go to Piggly Wiggly and buy good food, or you might go to another store and buy good food, Food Lion, and you could buy food from or Walmart, any of those places. You see, it's a matter of personal choice. So the idea is you could go to any one of these churches and still be a person of God and be saved. So the idea that you have to be in one particular church in order to be saved sounds absurd to them. So why do they even ask the question? Because they hold to this view. They're coming from this vantage point. But let's go further. Why is this question asked? This question is asked because of prejudice. Prejudice is where we have prejudged something. There is this concept that's made as a prejudicial charge at times. That is, yes, y'all are the ones who think you're the only ones going to heaven. That charge or question is driven by the fact that there is prejudice against the church and the things for which it stands. Again, prejudice means they have already decided based on what they have heard that cannot be true. So they have prejudged. So you introduce yourself and you say, or you invite someone to church. Oh, well, what church do you attend? Well, I'm over at the El Bethel Church of Christ. Oh, y'all are the ones. You see, here's the prejudice coming up. Y'all are the ones who think you're the only ones going to heaven. See, it's driven by prejudice. Proverbs 18:13 says, "He that answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him." In other words, don't draw conclusions without looking at the evidence. Prejudice means they have drawn conclusions without asking or looking for the evidence. We're still answering the question, why is this question even asked of us? Thirdly, it's asked because of ignorance. Let me define ignorance. Ignorance is not a reflection on one's intelligence. It's simply something that someone does not know. All of us present are ignorant about something. In other words, there's something you don't know. There's some field you don't know. It might be the medical field, but others of you know the medical field, but you might not know the electrical field. There's just certain things you don't know. That means we are ignorant of those things. Doesn't mean we're not intelligent. It just means there's some things we don't know. So when we say ignorance, we're saying there's some things that people do not know about the church. They do not know the nature of the church and what it is. That's why we're going to spend time talking about that. They do not know what the Bible says about the church. So they're asking the question because of ignorance. The reason for that ignorance is we may not be teaching on the church as we should, or these people may not have been taught. So don't assume they already know what the term church means, that they already understand what the Bible teaches about the church. Understand, probably they don't understand that, and we're going to answer from that vantage point. Now let's talk about what this question does. Now the question is asked for a reason. Sometimes it's just asked out of curiosity. But first of all, it puts us in a dilemma. How so? Sometimes it's designed to put us in a dilemma. Here's the dilemma. You've been asked the question by your friend that you've invited to come to church, and you were hopeful they would come, and you were hopeful you may have a Bible study, and you thought you might lead them to Christ. And oh, by the way, are you all the ones that think you're the only ones going to heaven? Now, how are you going to answer that? You see, if you answer no, we're not those who believe that. They're going to have a hard time harmonizing that with what you are going to be teaching them, and furthermore, that's just not the truth. So you say, I can't answer no. But if you answer yes, that person is turned off to further teaching, and you know that's going to turn them off, and that just confirms their prejudice. They already are prejudiced against the church, and so you're just going to further prejudice them. They've put you in a dilemma. Because you go, oh yeah, that's what we think. You answer that without giving evidence, that's probably going to confirm their evidence. So you feel the pressure of a dilemma. How do I answer that question? Here's something else it does. It charges us with narrow-mindedness. That's part of the charge of the question, or the charge, however it may be presented. You see, narrow-mindedness is not acceptable in our present society. We live in a society that is broad-minded and liberal-minded. This is the day of postmodernism. The very idea that you would think only those in the church of Christ would be saved puts you in the category of being an extremist. So you're now in the category of those who may be a bigot, a chauvinist, a racist, or a sexist. How dare you be so narrow-minded? I'm trying to describe what the question, why the question is asked, and what's driving what this question is driving. What is it trying to accomplish? Not only is it driven from prejudice, it often creates prejudice. What do we mean it creates prejudice? Among those who hear the question, among those who hear the charge, it causes other people to be turned off. There have been times in the midst of a home Bible study where it looks like one is about to obey the gospel. They're beginning to grasp and they're beginning to learn. And I'm thinking they're on the verge of obeying the gospel. And maybe here's another family member who doesn't really like what's going on. And right in the middle of the study, oh, by the way, I've been meaning to ask you, aren't y'all the church that think you're the only ones going to heaven? And why'd they just throw that in? Well, I don't know. But I know what it just did. I know it just created prejudice in the person that I was about to baptize. It put a wedge in this Bible study that I was making some progress in. And so why is that question asked? Sometimes it's designed to put us in a dilemma, charge us with narrow-mindedness, and even create more prejudice. Now I understand a little about the question. Sometimes it's asked out genuine, sometimes it's asked out of prejudice, sometimes it's asked in order to create prejudice. However the question is asked, we need to answer that, so let's come to an understanding of the answer and how we answer that. How do I answer that when somebody asks me that question? If it's in a Bible study, and a home Bible study, I'll take the time to begin to answer that. If I'm asked on the fly, meaning that someone just walks by me, and aren't y'all the ones, I don't give them an answer. You say, why don't you give them an answer? I'll tell them, if you want to study that question and you'll give me 1 hour of your time, I'll give you biblical answer to that question. But if you don't have an hour, then I think we'll just let that question go. But why do I do that? Because if I answer yes, that just confirms their prejudice. They don't have any evidence that I presented, so they're not going to accept my answer. If I say no, I can't give them that answer. But I'm going to tell them, I'll give you an answer if you'll give me an hour of your time. Some have taken me up on that and others have not. Give me an hour of your time and we'll sit down and we'll study. So what do I say in the Bible study? Well, first of all, we need to define the term church. Now, why do we need to do that? Because as I mentioned church, I've got one thought in mind because I'm using it as the Bible uses the term. They're using the term church in an entirely different sense. So when I mention being in the church is essential, or salvation is in the church, they're confused because we're using terms in different senses. So we need to define the church. We need to be simple. So we start with this. What is the church? Well, first of all, the church is people who are saved. That's two different concepts. So let's start with the first. The church involves people. In other words, the church is not a building. The church is not just something that's religious. The church involves people. Now let's go to Acts chapter 8 and verse 3. Let's define the church as being people. Let's give evidence. Let's speak where the Bible speaks and be silent where the Bible is silent. In Acts 8 and verse 3, we're going to see the church was equal to men and women. Here Paul made havoc of notice the term church. How did he make havoc of the church? By entering every house, dragging off men and women, committing them to prison. What he did to men and women is what he was doing to the church. So the church was made up of men and women. The church is people. Now the person you're talking to may need that information. You say, well, that's simple. I don't need that. The person you answer that question to may need to understand the church is not a building, it's people. They may need to be reminded of that. Don't ever underestimate the ignorance of your audience. That's not a put down. Just don't underestimate that they may not know as much as you think they know. All right, now that I know the church is people, let's go back and notice that it's not only just any people, but it's people who have come into a saved relationship with God. Now let's spend a little time giving some biblical evidence of that. The church is those who are saved. Now how do I know that? Well, let's start with Acts 2 and in verse 47. The Lord, this is on the day of Pentecost, and before you get to verse 47, remember they were told to believe, verse 36. They were told to repent, verse 38, and be baptized, verse 38. Verse 41, they did that. All right, now they've done that. Verse 47 said the Lord added to the church daily those who were being saved. Those who were saved were added to the church. Who was added to the church? Those who were saved. Where are the saved? They're in the church. Who's in the church? It's those who are saved. The Lord added to the church those who were being saved. The church and the saved are one and the same in Acts 2:47. I had a man ask me one time who was in the Baptist church, came and asked me the question. He said, I've asked a number of preachers this question, and no one's ever answered my question. I don't believe that, but I believe they had answered his question. But the question was, will only those in the Church of Christ be saved? I want an answer. And I said, I'll tell you what, give me an hour of your time and I'll answer that question. He said, all right, I'll give you. And I said, before you come back, you read Acts 2 and 47. Just read that verse. Read it over and over and over, and you read that. And so he came back a day or two later. He said, I don't need you to answer the question. Acts 2:47 answered that for me. It just told me the church and the saved are one and the same. I see what that text says. All right, let's go again. Let's notice that the term church comes from this Greek word ekklesia. And you say, I don't know anything about Greek. You know more about it than you think you know. Let's take this word ekklesia. What does the word ekklesia mean? It can be translated assembly. We are in an ekklesia, an assembly. It can refer to the church in the sense of the church universal or church local. The term ekklesia is a compound word. Ek means out of. It's the same word that you see before these doors that's translated exit. What does exit mean? That means that's where you go out. That's what ek means. It means to go out. All right? What does klesia mean? It means to call. So the word ekklesia means the called out. Now the reason we're called an assembly is, the ekklesia is an assembly. We've been called out from our daily purpose to come together for worship. It's an assembly. But it's used in a different sense. Those who have been called out by the gospel, Paul said you're called by the gospel. They were called out of sin into salvation, called out of darkness into light. Those who have been called out of darkness into light, that's a term for salvation. In other words, those who have been called out are the church, the ekklesia. That agrees with chapter 2 and in verse 38. Let's go to the book of Ephesians. I don't know of a single chapter that says more about the church being those who are saved than Ephesians chapter 2. Well, no wonder, because Paul said he spoke concerning Christ in the church. That's what the letter was about. So in Ephesians chapter 2 and in verse 16, that he might reconcile, that's a term for salvation, them both to God, wherein one body. Those who are reconciled are in the body. Those who are in the body are those who are reconciled. The church and those who are reconciled. Those who are saved and those in the church are one and the same. We'll get more evidence of that as we go along. Same book now. Let's turn over to chapter 5 and in verse 23. We read that Christ is the head, the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and He's the Savior of the body. Whom does He promise to save? The body. We'll see in chapter 1 in a moment, that's the church. So the body is those that He promises to save, and those that He promises to save are in the church. I'm learning the church is those people who are in a saved relationship with God. Now let's turn to Acts chapter 11, perhaps from previous studies in the book of Acts. You might have this marked in your Bible. If you don't, this would be a good time to underline and draw some arrows and note some things found in Acts chapter 11. This is an interesting development of Acts chapter 11. In Acts chapter 11, we're going to read about a church. But before we read about a church, I want you to notice, now beginning about verse 19 and 20, there were the men who were scattered, start at verse 19, after the persecution that arose over Stephen, they traveled as far as Phoenicia, Cyprus, and Antioch, preaching the word to no one but the Jews only. All right. Now verse 20. Some of them were men of Cyprus and Cyrene when they came to Antioch. Now here they are at Antioch. That's important. They spoke to the Hellenists. What are they doing? They're preaching the Lord Jesus. You might underline that. They came to Antioch. They preached the Lord Jesus. We're going to see what happens when they did that. Now, upon hearing the preaching of the Lord Jesus, I want you to notice that verse 21, the hand of the Lord was among them, and a great number believed and turned to the Lord. That's a description of salvation. If we stop there, would you agree that those are saved people? They heard the preaching of Jesus, and they believed and turned to the Lord. They're saved people. They're in a right relationship with God. How did they believe and turn to the Lord? By hearing the preaching of Jesus. Now the news of this, verse 22, came to the church at Jerusalem. They sent Barnabas that he should go as far as Antioch. And when he came, and here you might underline, and had seen the grace of God. You ever seen the grace of God? Oh, you've never seen the grace of God, literally, but you saw the effect of the grace of God. That's what he saw. He saw that people had received the grace of God. Further confirmation, we're talking about saved people. You might underline that. They received the grace of God. They had seen the grace of God. And he was glad in that with purpose of heart they should continue with the Lord. That's what he encouraged them to do. Now he was a good man, full of the Holy Spirit and full of faith, and a great many people were added to the Lord. Now verse 25, and Barnabas departed to Tarsus to seek for Saul. Bring him to Antioch now. Now verse 26 says, when he found him, he brought him to Antioch, and that it was for a whole year they assembled with the church. Might underline that. Now my question is, where'd that church come from? Where'd the church come from? Go back to Acts chapter 1 and read all the way up here to Acts chapter 11. Even go further and tell me about anything you've read about up to this point about a church at Antioch. You hadn't read a thing about a church at Antioch. Where did that church at Antioch come from? I'll tell you where that church came from. When people heard the preaching of the Lord Jesus, they believed and turned to the Lord. They received the grace of God, and those were the people who comprised the church at Antioch. See the point being made? Those in the church and those who received the grace of God and believed and turned to the Lord were the same people. But we're not done. Look at verse 26. They assembled with the church and taught a great many people, and the disciples. What about the disciples? We're called Christians first at Antioch. You might underline those terms. You see, those who are Christians are the same people that were disciples. Those that were Christians are the same people that are in the church. They are the same people that believed and turned to the Lord and received the grace of God. I've just saw a definition from the context that the church is those who are indeed saved. What was the church at Antioch? The church at Antioch was disciples, Christians, people who received the grace of God and believed and turned to the Lord. That's what the church came from. We're trying to define what the church is. It's people who are saved. Let's go further. The terms of entrance are the same. Get you a piece of paper sometime and put a line down the middle, and on one side, list the things that you have to do in order to be saved. Then go on the other side of the piece of paper and list what I have to do to enter the body of Christ, the church. And when you get through, that's the same list. What I have to do in order to be saved and what I have to do to enter the body of Christ are one and the same. That tells me that those who are in the church are those who indeed are saved. But let's go further. Now I know what the church is. The church is those who are saved. Let's talk about the fact there is one church. The Bible says there's just one church. I want you to notice three things now. We're trying to establish there's one church. Here's three things. Number one, this is quite simple. Jesus only promised one church. How do I know that? Matthew 16, verse 18, and I say unto you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. Notice that singular in number. Now, if he built hundreds of churches, he did more than what he promised. He said, I will build my church. He only promised one. Now, if they're more than that, then I've got to somehow figure out how to harmonize that, or I've got a contradiction somehow. Upon this rock I will build my church. He only promised one. Here's the second thing of the three. There is just one. Now, I want to work through this very slowly, methodically, though you already know this, as I would if I were in a home Bible study, and so you might want to do the same thing as you talk to someone. Let's open our Bibles to Ephesians 4 and in verse 4. Turn to Ephesians 4 and verse 4. Here are a number of things of which the text says there is one. And when it says there's one, it means there's just one. You say, how do you know it means there's just one? I know it means there's just one because the same ones refer to God, to the Lord, and to the Spirit and faith. It means there's just one God, just one Lord, just one Spirit, just one faith. But now notice what the text says at verse 4. There is one body. How many bodies, Paul? He said there's one. O-N-E, one. Not two, not zero, there's one body. Does that mean there's only one? Well, the same word is used with reference to God. There's one God, there's one Spirit, there's one Lord, there's one faith. Now let's let the author define for himself. I'm not going to go to a lexicographer and see what the word body. I'm not going to go to the dictionary and find out what body means. I'm not going to go to a commentator and ask him what it means. I'm not going to guess at what it means. I'm going to let the inspired writer define it for me. So let's back up to chapter 1. Here's the same writer, same book, writing by inspiration. Here's what he said. Chapter 1, 22 and 23. And he put all things under his feet and gave him to be head over all things. Are you reading with me now? Over all things to the church, which is his body. Colossians 1 makes the same point. Gave him a head to be over all things to the church, which is his body. Now the author just defined for me that the body is the church. So the text says there is one body. The same text says the body is the church. The conclusion is there is one church. I know what the church is. It's those who are saved. And the text says there is one church. All right, let's go further. There are 3 points we're making on the one church. Jesus only promised one. Paul said there is just one. Here's the third of the 3. And that is the Bible is silent about churches. There is no passage that says anything about churches or denominations. There are passages that talk about plurality of local churches, like one at Corinth, one at Ephesus, and one at Rome, etc. There are various local churches, but the Bible is silent about denominations and about churches, plural. If the Bible is silent, then it's not God's will. How do I know? If any man speak, 1 Peter 4:11 says, let him speak as the oracles of God. So I have a responsibility in teaching, and you do too as you teach your neighbor. Same passage applies to you as it does to me. As we teach our friends and neighbors, if we speak as the oracles of God. We need to put our finger on the text. So if I'm going to affirm there are churches and denominations, I need to put my finger on the text. If I'm going to affirm there is one church, I need to put my finger on the text. Hebrews chapter 7 and verse 14, the Lord sprang out of Judah, of which tribe Moses spoke nothing concerning priesthood. When God was silent, that means that was not God's will. And furthermore, 2 Timothy 4:1 and 2, We're charged with the responsibility of preaching the Word. So as you talk to your neighbor and friend, your charge is to preach and teach the Word of God, not your opinion, not mine or anyone else's. So if there are churches, where are the passages that talk about these denominations? Now, we're still trying to answer the question. We've defined church from the standpoint of the Bible. We've seen there is one church. Let's see why denominationalism is wrong. That concept we mentioned a few moments ago. Now, what is denominationalism? The word denomination, defined by the American Heritage Dictionary, means the act of naming a name, a designation, the name of a class or a group or classification. We don't normally use that term denomination except with reference to churches in our present day. But many of you are old enough to remember a day in which that term was used in banking, where you went to the bank and you had a check and you would get ready to cash this $100 check. The teller would ask you, now they may ask, is it large bills or small bills you want? How do you want this? Do you want it all in ones? Do you want it in 100? Do you want 250s? Do you want 5? What do you want? But they used to ask the question, and I can remember going as a child with my parents, they'd put a check down, they'd ask, what denomination? They were not asking what church you're in. They didn't care about that. They're wanting to know, how do you want your money? What division of money do you want? Now, here's what that term implied when it was applied to money. It means that our money is divided into various forms. Now, let's just suppose that the only form of currency we had was $1 bills. We don't have fives, we don't have tens, we don't have $2 bills, we don't have anything else. We don't have coins. All we have is $1 bills. That's the only currency we have. And you take a $100 check and you put it down and they say, what denomination? Well, duh, that's a dumb question, real dumb, because there's only one form of currency we have, and that's dollar bills. So I guess I'll take 100 ones. That's the only thing there is. The fact they ask what denomination implies there's different denominations. There's ones, there's fives, there's tens, there's 20s, there's 50s, there's hundreds. So there are three things implied by that statement. Let's follow these carefully. Number one, that implied that money is divided into various denominations. A second thing implied by that is one denomination is as good as another. I'm not saying a 1 is equal to 100, but the division is equal. In other words, which is better? Which is better? 2 50s or 10 10s? Which is better? One's as good as the other, isn't it? Isn't one just as good as the other? One division as good as another? And thirdly, implied in that, there are no wrong choices. You may like a $100 bill, but I may like 100 ones. Who's to say I'm wrong in that? There's no wrong choices. Someone that says, I don't like that. I'd rather have 25. Somebody said, no, I'd rather have 5 20s. Okay, doesn't make any difference. You see, there are no wrong choices. Now let's take that same concept and apply it to denominationalism as we had a moment ago. Here's the concept. God's people are divided into these various segments. Now, when we use the term denomination, and be careful, listen to me carefully. When we talk about other denominations, watch that language. What that implies is we are a denomination and these other churches are a denomination. And we're no different than them. That's the language of Ashdod. Here's what's implied by the language of denominationalism. That God's people are divided, number one. Same thing with reference to money. So what that means is all of God's people here are divided into various flavors or segments. Secondly, implied in that, one is as good as another. So which is better, the tens or the fives? If you have it coming out to 100, which is better? One's no better than the other one. So if denominationalism be true, which one of these churches is better? This church is just as good as that church, and this church is just as good as this one. There's none any better. And thirdly, it implies there's no such thing as a wrong choice. You can't tell anybody they're wrong for being in the Baptist church or being in the Methodist church or being in the Catholic church. They're not wrong because there are no wrong choices, you see. That's what that means. Now, let's list 4 reasons why denominationalism is wrong. Number 1, it is not found in the Bible. In other words, I don't have to go find a passage that says, and I'm going to quote, that Paul says, now let me write unto you Verily I say unto you, denominationalism is wrong. You're not going to find that statement. But here's a principle that is violated by denominationalism. It's just not taught in the Bible. If any man speak, let him speak as the oracles of God. Now, I can preach one body because I can find that in the oracles of God. I can preach that the body is the saved because that's in the oracles of God. Denominationalism is not. Secondly, it's contrary to the pleas for unity. Do you remember in 1 Corinthians 1:10, Paul said, I would that you all speak the same things? In denominationalism, they speak different things. Contradictory doctrines. Notice in John chapter 17, 20 and 21, Jesus prayed that they who believe on me through their word, that's me and that's you. Anyone who believes on Christ is believing on Christ through the words of the apostles. That's us. That they may be one as we are one. Was the Father and the Son united, speaking the same things, teaching the same doctrine on what's essential to salvation? Thirdly, what's wrong with denominationalism? It makes a difference what one believes in religion. If denominationalism be true, one church is as good as another, one faith is as good as another, you can be saved in any one of these denominations, it makes no difference what you believe. Let's turn to 2 Thessalonians. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. You say, well, how would you show someone that it makes a difference what you believe? Well, let's go to 2 Thessalonians 2. This would be, if I couldn't deal with any other passage, I would deal with this one. Verses 10 through 12. What I want you to notice is there's a difference of what one believes on the one side and what one believes on the other. Notice the difference that it makes. Does it make a difference what they believe? With all unrighteous deception, somebody's deceived. Among those who perish, they perish because they're deceived. Because they did not receive the love of the truth that they might be saved. Those who receive the truth would be saved. I don't have to go any further. We're going to look at verse 11 and 12. But verse 10 tells me it makes a difference whether you believe the truth or are deceived. Let's look at verse 11. For this reason God would send them strong delusion. Somebody would be deluded. That they should believe a lie. Some people will believe a lie. That they might all, what's going to happen to them, be condemned who do not believe the truth but have pleasure in unrighteousness. Not only am I seeing that it makes a difference, I'm seeing the difference that it makes. And furthermore, it's contrary to the idea of there being one body. If denominationalism be true, there is not one body. If there is one body, denominationalism is not true. We're still trying to answer the question now. I want you to understand that God's way is narrow. Now, why do we need to make that point? When someone asks you the question, will only those in the Church of Christ be saved? Or is that what y'all think? They may not word it completely out, but what they're saying in that and what they're thinking is, that seems very narrow-minded. How dare you be so narrow-minded to think that only one group would be saved? Let's understand that God's way is narrow. That's the problem in grasping the answer to the question is, how could you be so narrow-minded? Let us understand that truth by the nature of truth is narrow. Illustrate that to your friend. 2 plus 2, what is 2 plus 2? The answer obviously is 4. Well, why not make it 3.9? That's close enough. Or 4.1. That's not the nature of truth. Truth is 2 plus 2 is 4. Truth is narrow. It doesn't allow for any other answer, any other variation of that. Truth by the nature of truth is narrow. There's only one answer to that. 2 plus 2 is 4. Let's go to Matthew chapter 7. God's way is a narrow way. And look in the Sermon on the Mount. This will be a familiar passage to your friend or to your neighbor that you talk to or family member. And let's understand God's way is narrow. See, we can't fathom God's way is so narrow. Look at verse 13. Enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go in by it. Because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way that leads to life, and there are few who find it. What did Jesus just say? There's two ways. There's one that leads to destruction. There's one that leads to heaven. And many are going to go by the way of destruction, and only a few are going to be saved. God's way is narrow. But let's go further. Let's talk about a parallel question or questions that might be asked. You see, when someone asks you, will only those in the Church of Christ be saved? What they're saying is, how can you be so narrow-minded as to think or believe a doctrine that excludes people? So here's how that works. That if you're saying only those in this church are going to be saved, how am I supposed to accept that when that means this group and this group and this group and this church and that church are going to be lost? So I'll ask him the parallel question. Do you believe that one must believe in Christ in order to be saved? And almost without fail, their answer is, well, sure. You have to believe in Christ to be saved. You mean to tell me that you think the Jews are going to be lost? You mean to tell me you think Muslims will be lost? You mean to tell me you think Jehovah's Witnesses will be lost? Because none of those believe in the deity of Christ. And almost always their answer is, yeah. You just taught a doctrine that excludes people. But you're not willing to accept a doctrine that excludes people. Now tell me how that works. You're supposed to reject this because it excludes people from being saved, but you believe a doctrine that excludes people from being saved. Ask them parallel questions. Paul did that in the book of Romans. He did that in 1 Corinthians. Now let's look at what we've seen. We've defined the term church. We've seen there is one church. We've talked about denominationalism being wrong and God's way is narrow. When we combine those principles, the answer to the question is yes, one must be a member of the church of Christ in order to be saved. But your question may be, how do I know that the church of Christ is that which you read about in the pages of the New Testament? That brings us to our third and final point. Let's understand what this answer demands of us. I know what the question is. I understand the question now. And I understand the answer to that question. I need to understand what that answer demands of us. I try to make it clear to people when I'm talking to them about the gospel is we're not asking someone to swap churches. We want to ask you to leave that denomination and become a part of a different denomination. Switch brands, so to speak. So what does that answer demand of you? It's the first thing. Two things I want to mention. First of all, it demands that you be in the church of Christ in order to be saved. If that answer be true, you say, what does that mean for me now? I've been interested in this question. That means you need to be in that church in order to be saved. But now the question is, how do I know the church of Christ is the church you read about in the pages of the New Testament? How do I know that? I want to share with you an illustration I've used many times in meetings and Bible studies, and you perhaps have seen it before, but it captures a thought. Some of you have never seen it. Let's suppose during Christmas season you go to one of the local stores or shopping mall, and you walk in and there's a mother that's frantic because she's lost her little boy. And she's crying, and you being the Good Samaritan, rush to her and you say, what can I do to help? And she said, I've lost my little boy. You say, I'll tell you what I'll do, I'll help him. So you tear out through the store or through the mall saying, I'll find the boy because one boy's just as good as another. And you bring any boy back. And she's going to say, no, that doesn't work. You've upset her even more. Why? And we laugh at that when we're finding a boy, but that's how people find churches. One church is as good as another. You say, okay, that doesn't work. So you tear out through the store again. You say, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll find the boy that I like. And they're kind of hard to get them to behave at a certain age, so I want them a little bit older. So I'm going to find a boy that fits the description that I like. A boy of my choice, and I'm going to bring him to her, and that'll satisfy her. And we laugh about that because that's absurd. And yet we look for churches that way. We look for churches, I'm looking for a church of my choice. I'm looking for a church that I like. Doesn't matter what you like. Doesn't matter what kind of boy I like. So then you tear out through the store or the mall again and you say, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll find the most popular boy in the store. That's got to be the right one. And I'm going to ask and line some boys up and ask which the people like the best, and the one they pick out has got to be the one because the most popular is got to be the right one. And we laugh about that, but that's how we find churches, isn't it? Oh, look for the most popular church in town. Well, since that doesn't work, then you say, well, how can I find her little boy? And the only thing you know to do then is you go to the mother and you say, you tell me the identifying characteristics of your boy. What are they? And she says, well, he's 10 years old. And you say, well, no, I like one with, I like little boys when they're about 5, or I like them when they're about 15. Doesn't matter what you like. Her boy's 10. And she says he's 70 pounds, he's 50 inches tall, his name is Tommy. You say, I don't like the name. Doesn't matter if you like the name Tommy. Who cares? You're looking for her boy. And his hair is brown, his eyes are green. And you're looking for her boy. And so you go through them all and you look and you find a boy that's 10 years old, but he has a different name. You said names doesn't matter. It does to her. She named him Tommy. You say, okay, I know what I'll do. I'll find a boy named Tommy. It doesn't matter about any other characteristic. As long as he's got the right name. He's 15 years old, but she's interested in the name Tommy, and that's all that matters. No, that's not all that matters. When have I found her boy? I found her boy when I find one that meets every one of the identifying characteristics. If I can understand that with boys, I can understand that when I'm finding the church. That's a lesson within itself. We won't go through every one of those characteristics. But how do I know? And when your friend asks you, how do you know this is the right church? I'm looking for a church that meets every characteristic just like the boy meets every characteristic. I'm looking for a church whose name is found in the Bible. I'm looking for the church whose origin agrees with the Bible. When a church can say, our church was established by Martin Luther, that's not the church of the New Testament. When it said John Wesley started ours, well, then that's not the right church. I'm looking for a church whose organization fits the Bible. When they say our headquarters is in Cleveland, Tennessee, another one said, no, ours is in Salt Lake City. Another one said, no, ours is in Rome, Italy. Another one says, no, ours is in Louisville, Kentucky. And another one is somewhere else, that's Brooklyn, New York. That's not the church you read about in the New Testament. I'm looking for a church whose work and doctrine and practice can be found in the pages of the New Testament. And then and only then have I found the church that I read about in the pages of the New Testament. What does this answer demand? That you leave and renounce denominationalism. Again, we're not asking someone, we want you to swap churches. We're trying to get you to switch brands. We've got a better deal for you. But if what we're saying is true, that one must be in the church in order to be saved, what it demands is that you be in that church, and it means that if you are part of denominationalism, you leave and renounce denominationalism and become a part of the church you read about in the pages of the New Testament. That's what the answer demands. Will only those in the church of Christ be saved? We need to understand the question. We need to understand the answer. And we need to understand what that answer demands of us. And we need to know how to answer that question so that we can do the most effective good rather than create more prejudice. How can we answer that question? There may be one or more present who's not a Christian, who's not a child of God. Would you come believing that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God? Would you repent of your sins, acknowledge your faith, and be buried in the waters of baptism for the remission of sins? If you're subject in any way, would you come while together we stand and sing?